You're listening to Cross Rhythms Plymouth 96.3 FM, and I've got a real pleasure and privilege today of being joined in the studio by someone that some of you, I'm sure, will know through his kind of music career, worship music. It's Godfrey Birtill. Hi, Godfrey.
Hi, good to be here.
It's great to have you here. Godfrey's here for our show called Life Stories, which, if you've listened regularly, you'll know exactly what it's about. But it is, as the name suggests, talking about the guest's life, particularly their faith, what that means to them, how that kind of came about in their life. So as we start all of these, Godfrey, tell us a little bit about your upbringing. Where did you grow up and what was life like for you in your kind of early years?
Yeah, I was born in Chorley. 12 Rotherwick Avenue in the house. And my dad was a newspaper editor. And I got involved in photography at quite an early age. Did a Saturday job printing and so on. And part of that was going to an Anglican church, the local Anglican church. My family were very much connected with the local Anglican church, and I was an altar boy. And so that rhythm was in my life, sort of thing, at an early age. As time went on and into my teens, I kind of took the route. Well, I learned the guitar and probably took the route that was not a good one, which was with bands. I mean, it was very good and exciting, lots of parties and all the rest of it, and going around with a band. But unfortunately, that ended up mixed up in the drug scene, which was a bad turn. But most of that early life was spent around Chorley. But we travel out now and again. The band I had, we played at Cambridge May Ball and things like that. So the odd time we get out of Lancashire,
Yeah.
But generally a happy childhood, yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned there that kind of you'd go to an Anglican church. Would you say that faith was like a big aspect then of the home, or was it kind of more a sort of cultural thing? Your parents went because their neighbours went, and culturally they went because they were kind of British, that kind of thing, or was it very much a personal thing for them?
It was just part of our lives, really. And I remember, I'll never forget my dad every night, kneeling by the bed praying,
Sure.
And he read scripture and things. And my mum was from a Methodist background, and it was just part of my life. I didn't kind of think anything different to that,
Sure.
It was just, I just grew up in it, and it. I loved it too. I loved the hymns. In fact, my mum and dad used to take me to the Methodist churches when I was a kid because I loved the hymns. I loved the music.
Yeah.
And there were more in the Methodist church. You didn't have many hymns in the Anglican church at that time. It was high Anglican church. So it was always a treat going to a Methodist church.
Yeah. So when, obviously, as you say, you got into playing in bands and stuff, was that like the sort of sole focus of your life in those years? Was that your main passion, just playing music and all those kinds of things? And was it something you felt you could take professionally in those early years? Was it something you thought, this is going to be me now?
Yeah, it was that and photography. I was a very keen photographer. But the music, I learned to play the guitar. I bought a guitar off my cousin for £5. It was quite a tough action and everything, but I persevered and eventually, made some sense out of it, and then used to play at, family parties at Christmas and that. They'd ask me to play a few songs. There'd be sort of Donovan songs or Bob Dylan. And things like that. I might have written the odd song now and again. It would have been odd as well.
Well, that's an interesting place to kind of pause it for this section. As you alluded to, things went a bit of a dark turn in terms of the drug scene from the connection with bands and things. But we'll stop for some music, pick up the conversation with Godfrey after this. You're listening to Life Stories here on Cross Rhythms Plymouth, and it's great to be joined by Godfrey Birtill, who many of you will know from his music, Christian music, over many, many years, but we kind of haven't got there yet in the story, Godfrey. We've just got to your early years in bands, playing guitar as a kind of teenager and things like that. And you've alluded to it, but things took a kind of dark turn within that. There was a big influence of drugs at the time, with music kind of twinned. and you got involved in that. Well, what happened for you and to you in that sense?
Yeah, when I think back, I was the youngest of 5 children. I've got 3 sisters and a brother. And I suppose I might have been a little spoilt, really, and I've always been the baby. I still am. My elder sister, I just saw this last week. She still calls me the baby. But yeah, I kind of, within the band, back in the 70s, and we didn't get involved in heavy drugs like heroin or anything like that, but cannabis and stuff, and a few other things, hallucinogenic drugs and stuff. And yeah, it had a bad effect in the end. Everything seemed fine, and then but it had a really bad effect on me. That's why I'm quite anti-cannabis of any kind of thing like that, because it sort of brought on a kind of psychosis, and I was like, I was just in a heck of a mess, really, and yeah, so I ended up, I had to go in hospital, and it was a really tough time and very strange time, and yeah, difficult to get through.
What sort of age were you then? Was that?
I was in my late teens, early 20s.
Okay.
And yeah, and eventually I got out. I wasn't in there a long time. Sort of a month or so, maybe a bit longer. But when I came out, it was like I was just stunned, really, with the drugs that they'd given me as well. They were very, they made you very drowsy and dopey. But I remember walking through my hometown, lost, really, into what I was going to do and everything, because I'd lost my job as a photographer and everything. Mm-hmm. And there was a guy preaching in the town, and kind of old school street preacher, but I stopped to listen. And as I was listening, it began to register. And when I look back, he was preaching the simple, straight gospel, of who we are in Christ, really, and showing how what Christ did for us to get free, and I just remember this, it was like the sound of the gospel impacted me. And I just stopped and I was transfixed, and I knew something had happened just by listening, just by hearing the gospel. I knew something had got me on track, Yeah. And as life went on, it changed my life, It was a while, and I just from that point grew and grew, and yeah. So I know the guy who preached now because I met him later on. I was giving my testimony somewhere. And the guy said, that was me.
Love that.
So this guy, Pete Lee, and Chorley, I know him to this day. We're still friends. And yeah, so thanks to Pete, I first heard the sound of the gospel that changed my life.
That's amazing. And was it something that you said, obviously, hearing the gospel message had a huge impact? Was it something that from that moment you were like, I'm committed here? Or did it take a while to sort of give your life to Jesus, for want of a better phrase?
I knew something had happened. I wasn't sure what. I just felt very, as Wester said, my heart was strangely warm.
Yeah.
That's the best way to describe it. I just knew there was something here. I felt love.
Yeah.
I felt a love, and I felt heavy rejection with going through a psychiatric ward. And, I've got friends to this day that are still good friends, but you also felt you were an embarrassment and a disappointment to your friends and family. That's all I could really feel. But suddenly I felt this love. I felt God's love. I felt Christ, his love for me, that I wasn't rubbish. You know what I mean? There was something good in my life.
Yeah.
And it was Jesus,
Amazing. Well, we'll stop for some more music now and pick up the conversation with Godfrey right after. Godfrey, we kind of haven't got to the point yet in the story where you started kind of creating Christian music, worship music talking about faith as such yet. But did that come in after this experience, you said, of hearing a street preacher, experiencing God's love in a really tangible way? How did things progress from you, and how did you start to connect music with that?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of embryonic start, really, with just little bits of songs that pointed to the love of God, you know, and then, you know, as time went on, I met my wife Jill, and we got married and moved to live in Wales and then in Derby, and then we moved back to Lancashire. It was about then, really, that I started to write songs in this church. I was like the worship pastor, if you like, and I started to write songs. And these songs, I do a few normal songs, and then I do a song that I'd written.
Yeah.
And it was always obvious which was the song I'd written, because all the other songs had the details underneath, and I just put underneath mine on the overhead. You remember those overhead things?
Yeah.
I just put anonymous.
Right.
So they all knew it was me. And but it was so like, anonymous. You know, the congregation would be like, you know, let's lift our hands up and encourage Godfrey, you know. So they weren't very good songs at all, you know, but I was very encouraged. A lot of them like bombed, you know, but I enjoyed it, you know, and I was kind of learning.
Yeah.
But I remember leading worship the first time, which was in at a Free Methodist church in Pemberton, and the pastor there encouraged me to lead worship. And I remember it being the strangest thing, because I was blown away with what happened, really, because it felt like, it sounds a bit odd this, but it felt like as I was singing, the congregation, it's like a balloon full of water, and it felt like you were connected to, you know, if it sort of moved over one side, it moved back over here. I think the Lord was showing me that it's not like the rock band. Mm-hmm. You're actually connected to the body. They are the band. You know, the congregation are in the band. So I've always said, you're all in the band. You've all passed the audition, you know. We're not playing at people.
Yeah.
You know, the rock thing doesn't go really. You know, we're not playing at folks. They are the band. I always look at the people as the most important part of the band, because they make the sound, you know, that corporate sound, which to me is what it's all about. Corporate singing to the Lord, yeah.
And the kind of times when you were writing this, what did worship music, so, you know, sung worship in churches, look like generally? Because it's changed so much over the years. It's changed, you know, you talked about being in a band in the 70s. From then till now, music in church is vastly different from what it was. Was it kind of controversial in the sense that you were playing with a guitar and stuff? Because I know in some churches it was, but
at this particular church, they were very open to guitars and everything. I don't think we had a drummer, but, you know. But it was a time of the early days of Graham Kendrick and stuff. So there was a lot of Graham's songs were coming through, as well as hymns. I played a lot of hymns and things. And it was a good mix. Being a Methodist, Free Methodist, you know, there was a lot of Wesley hymns and stuff, which I love, you know, I love. Yeah. In fact, one of my ancestors was a hymn writer.
Amazing.
That I discovered, James Montgomery. He's on my family tree.
Yeah.
And he was a Moravian hymn writer. Written lots of hymns, like Angels from the Realms of Glory and things like that.
No way.
Yeah, so I've always loved hymns. And but in that time, those early days, I played stuff like Graham songs and Noel Richards, you know, and Chris Bowwater, you know. It was the early days for them, and I loved what they were doing.
Yeah. Well, we will stop with some music shortly, some of your own music. But before we do, was it something that you were doing at that stage? Were you doing music professionally? Were you doing it just
I was
church
still
on a Sunday?
Still a press photographer.
Okay,
and then for the Lancashire Evening Post.
Yeah. So how did it progress for you? To be kind of a primary thing in your life, or sort of how did it sort of develop to be doing more recording and things like that?
Well, when I'd started, you know, like as the worship pastor that had made me, you know, leading the worship team, and I was doing some of my own songs by that time, and I'd had many people saying like, you should do this professionally, you know, but I thought, you're joking, you know, how do you even do that? You know?
Yeah.
But as time went on, my job changed dramatically from being a black and white photographer, which I loved, and it was going on digital and heading to Apple mics, which I really didn't get on with. And I struggled a bit with that, you know, and my job changed dramatically. And I knew it was time to get out, so I actually took the leap. And at the time, that very time, it was a very difficult time, and a lot was going on that was difficult to get through. And I remember one morning having physical pain in my chest as I woke up with all the struggle of it all. And I got this song that started off saying, "There's a lot of pain, but there's a lot more healing." And it was a song, Outrageous Grace. And I'd heard Jeff Lucas round off a meeting once by saying that very phrase. And I remember when he said it, "Outrageous Grace," it went boom, and it fitted with these words.
Love it.
So I wrote that song, Outrageous Grace, and that seemed to take off. Wherever I played it, it just went boom. It was just the right time. I don't know. I've played this song since, obviously, but back then in the early 90s, it really had, the mid 90s, it really had something, I can't explain what it was, but whenever I played it, it kind of seemed to have ignition.
Love it.
And I was invited to play at Grapevine in Lincolnshire. And I'd never done anything like that, you know. It was like thousands of people, 10,000 people, whatever. And they invited me on to play it. And I hadn't rehearsed with the band or anything, massive big band, you know. And so I just played my acoustic. And by the time I got to the second chorus, "Oh, Outrageous Grace," this big top with thousands of people, it just went boom like that. And, you know, it just took off. It was incredible, really. And then the band kind of joined in at the end, you know, sort of at the end of the song. And I was supposed to do it once, but then they asked me to do it at every meeting.
Wow.
Over the weekend, and it was a special time.
That's awesome. That's an amazing story. We'll pick that particular story up with Godfrey right after this. You're listening to Life Stories here on Cross Rhythms Plymouth, and I'm in conversation with Godfrey Birtill. I loved what you said in that last section. We've just heard the song Outrageous Grace, by the way, from Godfrey, which he wrote in the 90s. I loved how you said it kind of came out of like a time of real pain, a time of real difficulty. Do you think, because you said, you know, it felt like there was life, well, not just felt like, there was life on it when you played it in loads of different places, churches, whatever, and then Grapevine, it just took off in such an organic way, really unlooked for from how you've described it. Do you think there's something in the fact that it was born out of just genuine human challenge and trial that was on it, that there was life in that aspect to it, do you think, or...?
Yeah, it's very hard to work these things out.
Sure.
As to what actually has happened or happening. I just remember writing the song downstairs, and I'd play all my songs to Jill, my wife.
Yeah.
And I just finished it, and she was still in bed. It was early morning, and I sat on the edge of the bed and played the song. And every time I got to the chorus, she would just crack out laughing, and right. Then I'd start laughing every time I got to the chorus, and she fell out of the bed laughing at the chorus, you know. And I thought, there's something going on with this song, and sure enough, when I took it to places, that happened as well as crying. You know, people would fall on the faces. I remember at a Pioneer conference where people, as I was playing it, you know, I hadn't a clue what was going on. But people would run forward and fall flat on their faces crying, and others would be laughing out and everything. It was like all emotion release, you know.
Yeah.
I was in a state of shock, really. You know?
Yeah, I was going to say, because it's, you know, to use a very Christian phrase, but obviously very anointed. So obviously God engaging with people in such a profound way that, as you say, we can't fully describe. How did it feel to kind of have that song and something that, you know, very personal to you? I'm always fascinated by this anyway, from any songwriter, like when you write something that's just you and then suddenly you hear people singing it back, whether it's in a rock concert or a worship context. But how did that feel for you in terms of that happening with the song that you'd written? What was that like?
Well, it really is an amazing privilege, really, and I think one thing I remember when writing that song is the first song I wrote that made connection with people.
Yeah. And
the difference when I was writing it was this. I remember distinctly when I came to the chorus. So, wow, just I could hear thousands of voices singing it. You know, all my other songs prior to that were songs that I'd play and people just listened to. You know, they weren't what I'd call a corporate song.
Sure.
But this was the first one that was definitely a corporate song. So it's like, it's the feeling of the oneness, you know, when we were singing that song. And I was just like, it's just such a privilege to be part of it, you know. And at the end of the day, it's all owned by the body as well. It's a body song, you know. It's a corporate song, and you know. And I think it just registered, particularly at that stage of the 90s or whatever. Like I say, I can't work it out. I've thought about it, but I can never work it out. It just caused ignition. Yeah. Like I say, I still sing it now, and it's still a good song.
Sure.
But then it was like it had this kind of boom on it, you know.
Something that obviously God was using on it, breathing on it to speak to people, and it was obviously relevant to where lots of people were at. That message of outrageous grace was super relevant to everyone, which I just love it. I love the fact that you didn't manufacture it, and still all these years later you still can't quite figure out why it was so great, which is awesome. I love that. I love that.
Clue what's going on.
That's awesome. Well, we're going to stop for some more music now. This is Life Stories here on Cross Rhythms Plymouth, in conversation with musician Godfrey Birtill. And we've been talking about, I suppose, well, your life in general, but we've been talking particularly about your kind of start to be professional as a musician, professionally in kind of Christian music and things. And the song Outrageous Grace, and how that was just kind of went everywhere, kind of went viral, to use common parlance nowadays. Was that the stepping stone then? Did that song then lead to opportunities to record albums and things, and to take it further in festivals and stuff like that, or what happened?
I think it was the first song that I'd written that caught on, you know, that seemed to cause a stir. And but really, I still know a guy called Martin Scott. He now lives in Spain, but at the time he was going with teams into different places. Penzance was one of them, I remember. And he invited me with the team to do the music, you know. And so we'd go to a place, it's like a prayer team. I think it was Sowing Seeds for Revival, it was called. And so I'd be just part of the team and leading some songs and I would write songs while I was in the cities. So, you know, each city I'd find myself writing a song for the city.
Amazing.
And so this was at the time I just left my job. It was hardly zero income, living by faith, you know, and but going around to these cities with this team. But what began to happen was these cities invited me back, just me.
Oh, wow.
Will you come and do some more of this, you know? So suddenly all the places I've been were inviting me back to do more with their worship team on songwriting and things like that, and chili worship and stuff, Yeah. So how... I just love speaking with you, Godfrey. You seem a very humble man in the sense of, like, this has all kind of come about just following one step at a time. It's not like you had a grand plan to get into music and just followed step by step. How did that then kind of develop for you? And did you have a sense, wow, this is, you know, how did it feel to have that happen so organically in that sense, and to kind of just move and build? And was it just one step at a time? Is that how it felt at the time? Or yeah, you know, like I say, when I left my job, I had to leave the job as a photographer. It was killing me.
Yeah.
So I started off thinking I've got to make, you know, a living somehow. And so I started doing Clean Easy.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we take stuff around to houses and complete washout. I took all the stuff around to the houses, and they're always wet, soaking wet. And then I couldn't work it out. So anyway, but it didn't work. That didn't work. So I had a couple of things to try and earn an income. But then when I was getting invited back to other places, this was at the same time. Sometimes, I never asked for money, but they'd give me enough. It'd be enough for us to tick over.
Amazing.
And it was just like that. And then as time went on, it was feast or famine, I had no feet, I'd just show up, and some places you could be out of pocket,
Yeah.
And some places it was like, wow, thank you, and it'd keep you going for a couple of weeks,
Yeah.
And we learned, Jill and myself, we just learned to live like that, and sometimes I remember having £5, to last us for the week. And I remember going to Quick Save, the old Quick Save, and and then coming back saying, look what I bought for £5, all these loaves, stuff like that. We were living like that, sort of a bit hand to mouth, but in some ways it made us strong, and we never felt sad about it. You thought it's an adventure. And there was a feeling that the Lord was speaking in it while we were doing it. We were praying in the mornings, Jill and myself, and got this very clear word where I felt the Lord was saying, I look after those who are young, and just knew that was happening, that he was looking after us. There may be times where we go near the edge, but it always comes good, a few struggles, but lots of ups and downs, but all the time we knew he got us, We're going to be okay.
Absolutely. And so fully, living, as you say, by faith, in that sense of just relying on him first fully, and then he'll provide the rest. And all of the worship music, from hearing you speak about it, came from your connection with him, came from your relationship with him, came from just an organic love for him that you just expressed, and then other people benefited from that. I love how you said as well, though, that you didn't feel like these were necessarily your songs. They were like the songs for the body, songs for the cities you were in as well. How did that specifically come about as well, in terms of writing for cities? Did you go looking for the themes, or was it stuff you felt God dropped to you and stuff?
We'd just be there. Well, say for example, off the top of my head, Salisbury, I remember being there, and as we were praying for the city, and they said, oh, Salisbury, the motto is Apple of England's Eye, So I'd just be singing like, Salisbury, Apple of England's Eye, it's time to arise, rise up and break free, Salisbury, things like that.
That's amazing.
And I just loved doing it. It just seemed to just flow, There was no pressure. I didn't sit at the desk and say, now, what can I do? I've never tried to write songs. In fact, when young songwriters, I've been asked at groups and that, and about songwriting, and for me personally, I said, the best thing is try not to write songs.
Right.
Let them flow out of your life, And in fact, the songs that I write, usually, most of the time, it's like a snapshot. It's like a photograph. As a photographer, you get an eye for a picture. Whereas someone who's not got a trained eye, they don't spot it, But, I might, as a photographer, I might see in rectangles and take a picture, and say my wife or whatever wouldn't notice it. And then I'd show her the picture. And she'd go, wow, I never saw that. And it's the same with this kind of songwriting. There may be just a snapshot, like Outrageous Grace. And then you take the snapshot in the dark room, as it were, develop it, But I always find the development of the song it's stressful. It's not hard work. If it is, I tend to leave it.
Sure.
I tend to feel the best ones always come with ease. I got my head in scripture, all the different translations and all that, but it's an enjoyment. It's not a struggle to write songs. I've never tried to write a hit or anything.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. That's a really, really interesting way to put it and to describe it. It's more, it's a very dumbed down way of saying it, but kind of saying what you see rather than it being like you're trying to just build something from scratch. It's like there's something out there that I've seen. I love that analogy of like a photographer. There's a moment, there's a kind of something, that a word in season or something like that you've captured and gone, actually there's something on that, I'm going to document it, and you're documenting it, just happens to be in song form in that sense.
It is writing like a journalist,
yeah
and I've always thought as well that it's kind of an amateur.
Sure.
The word amateur means lover.
Really?
It's taken from a more amateur, the French word, and it means a lover of what you're doing. And so I've never really been a professional in the sense of it all being tidy. Lots of my songs are bad, sort of grammar and things like that. They're not perfect songs.
It's like a constant passion project in that sense, really.
If the song gets across what I'm sensing, the grammar might have to
take second fiddle. Good stuff. All right, we'll stop for music and pick up with Godfrey after this. You're listening to Life Stories here on Cross Rhythms Plymouth. I don't have enough time to speak to you, Godfrey, really. We're on the last section, which feels criminal. I feel like we've got so much more to touch on. But we've talked about how you kind of, your life from going from being in a band, being in drug scene from that band as a teenager, how that was a real challenge to you, mentally ending up in a ward needing psychiatric help, finding faith, being a Christian musician that many people will know you for today. So how did your music develop over the years? And I know that you said off air that you've got quite an amazing story as to how you always wanted to reach other people who were in the situation you were in as a teenager in a psychiatric ward. And you tried for many years and nothing happened. Tell us a bit about that story and your kind of songwriting as well.
Yeah, well, at the time I was in the 90s and early noughties and so on, I was mainly connected with the prayer movement and the prophetic movement, like my wife was. Some might even say even the Lord wondered what we were up to. It got a little complicated sometimes. But we came to a point in 2011 where both my wife and myself, it was like a rebooting. And particularly the scripture where Paul says, I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Christ and him crucified. And it was like the camel going through the eye of the needle, the feeling of this. And it was like the Lord was saying, I want some of the stuff you've learned over the years, I want you to let go of some of the baggage. And I want you to come forward. In fact, leave the camel behind, which kind of represented what we'd built up. And it was like for this rebooting, but the rebooting was a very positive message, which is the good news, the gospel for the gospel. And my songs changed from some of the begging and pleading songs I had in the past. And the change in my songs were like a very positive message, like, hey, have you heard the shocking truth? You're cleansed, accepted, justified, not guilty, embraced by Father. It's party time. Things like that were in the verses like that in the songs. And one of the songs was, I started writing songs that were like the Lord singing to us. So I'd written this song, Do You Believe What I Believe About You? And I think you're amazing. There's quite a bit behind how that all came about. And that's a song that opened the door for me to go into a psychiatric ward because a patient there had been helped by listening to this song. And while I was there in one of the youth wards, I felt, they invited me in, and I felt that the disappointment on these young people, in the late teens, early 20s. I thought it reminded me of when I was in the ward myself, and I could just feel it, this disappointment. I remember myself, I was disappointed in myself, I was disappointed in my family. And I just sensed at that moment, like the Lord showing me to sing to these young people, sing to them, I'm not disappointed in you. And I've written this song, I'm not disappointed in you. I never have been. I never will be. I don't do disappointment. It's something the Lord I believe. I don't believe the Lord does disappointment. And so that song I've taken into psychiatric wards. That first one, other psychiatric wards invited me in. And I even went in one in South Africa, which was like a prison, in fact, but they invited me in, and I just sang I couldn't take the guitar in, but I could sing the words,
Yeah. That's amazing. I love that story, as you told it there and off air, that, you tried for many years to get into psychiatric wards. I suppose sent letters, whatever you had to do to try and get in to.
Yeah, I knew people who worked
tell
there.
Your story. Yeah, speak to people, but
so they won't let you in. Yeah.
That's it. But I get very similar to your story about Outrageous Grace, just an organic thing that just suddenly there's life on it. Someone saying, I listened to this song, it's really helped. I love that you got invited from that and have been able to be in there. That must have been an amazing thing for you in terms of like God using the whole of your life, like the darkest parts of that story from in the early days, and really restoring it so then you can speak life to people in the same situation. That must have been one of the most rewarding things you've done, I should imagine, in many ways.
To be able to say to these young people, this isn't the end. I was
and
worse
you're living
than
proof.
most of them.
I was going to say, because you're not just saying it. Like, it's easy for someone to say it if that's their job and they're there as like, an officer in the ward or whatever, or a doctor or whatever. But to actually have been there and done it and say, look, this isn't the end, and I'm living proof of that is amazing.
Yeah. In fact, I was in worse state than a lot of the ones I've met.
Yeah. Well, I suppose the most recent record you've made, we talk about this, is called Who Are Ya?
Yeah.
And it's written YA, Who Are Ya?
Yeah.
Very deliberately, because it comes from a football chant, which I'm familiar with, other football fans will be familiar with, chanting to the opposition, Who Are Ya? Tell us about the story of how that song's come about and what it now means for you, because it doesn't mean the same thing it means when fans chant it pejoratively.
Yeah, well, I went to see Blackburn Rovers a while ago and with my son, and we were sat there in the middle of the crowd, and Blackburn were winning 3-0 against Preston, which was unusual for Blackburn. But this sound suddenly went up, and me and my son just like looked at each other like, wow, what an amazing big sound. And it's like the chanting, who are you? Who are you? Who are you? At the Preston fans. And obviously they're not inquiring who they are. They're kind of, they're like having a go, saying, what are you even doing here, kind of thing, And the sound was ringing in my ears on the drive home. And even when I woke up in the morning, I could still hear, who are you? Who are you? But I was hearing it differently. And it was almost like the great cloud of witnesses or something, like heaven, a sound from heaven singing over the earth. Do you know who you are? Who are you? Do you know who you are? Do you know you're in Christ? And this sound, and so it sparked this song, who are you? Do you know you are in I am, and I am in you? Yeah.
Love that. That's really beautiful. I love how that's come about. So finally then, just to finish off our conversation, as I say, I feel like we could talk for a lot longer. If time allowed, we would. But where can people find out more about your stuff, Godfrey, and get a copy of Who Are You and other records that you've done?
Well, my website is godfreyb.com, GODFREYB, letter B.com. Yeah, and on there, all the albums. You can get CDs. CDs of the future,
Yes, absolutely.
Or download from there, or of course it's on all the usual platforms.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Well, Godfrey, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you. Do check out the website godfreyb.com,
.com, yeah.
.com, godfreyb.com for more from Godfrey.